Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. Welcome to this very exciting panel on anticipatory diplomacy for innovation and emerging technologies. I'm Mercedes Ruehl. I'm the Financial Times correspondent for Switzerland, and very pleased to be here today with some of, I think, the finest names we could find for this topic. So let me introduce my two people who represent these worlds we're going to talk about today, which is Professor Ajay Kumar Sood. He's India's principal science advisor. He brings the perspective of scientific foresight, how governments can translate early research and signals into smart policy. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And of course, last but definitely not least, is Mr. Alexandre Fasel. He is the Secretary of State from Switzerland's Foreign Affairs Department and brings the diplomatic lens, I think, today. So India and Switzerland, very different countries, but I think fair to say leading in this space if we think about anticipatory diplomacy. India with its digital public infrastructure, growing AI ecosystem, Switzerland with its science diplomacy, networks and focus on digital trust. But they're very different, but I think complementary models for how to govern with emerging tech. I think the risk is, certainly as a journalist, I always think, there's a lot of talk about foresight, but how do we actually make sure that innovation doesn't kind of race ahead of us? So I guess what I would love to start with is, can you share a concrete, and given we don't have lots of time today, I'm going to jump right into it. Can you share a concrete example of where early diplomatic or policy helped prevent a technology-related problem later on? Mr. Fasel, Switzerland has embraced science diplomacy for years, and one of the things I'm very interested in is Swiss Next, and that program in particular. So is that kind of what anticipatory diplomacy looks like at work to you?
It certainly is an element of science diplomacy. Science diplomacy can be different things. In the case of Swiss Next, it is science policy in the sense of when you are seeking international corporations in order to produce the knowledge, in order to make sure that through an international corporation you can produce knowledge which is excellent, which then can be used domestically or internationally. So this is the kind of science diplomacy I call international science policy. The policy you need to put in place so that science happens and is of good quality, domestically and internationally. And the Swiss Next network is such an instance, to expose Swiss scientists to their international colleagues, seek cooperations, and further the actual work on science.
So turning this, Swiss Next to me is an incredible kind of, to me, like listening board throughout the world. How do you then take that into the Department of Foreign Affairs and use that knowledge?
We use all the knowledge we can gather, be it from the Swiss Next network, from the radar of GESDA, from what scientists tell us, in particular situations from working parties the federal government is forming in order to be informed by the scientific community. So there are many different strands through which the information comes to government.
Thank you very much. Professor Sood, from your side, how can governments turn early scientific signals, and I think these are what you definitely see in your line of work, from fields like AI or quantum computing, into policy before the risks emerge? Like how does this actually work in practice?
First of all, thank you for having me on this panel, and it's really a privilege to have a co-panelist as accomplished and famous as Alexandre Fasel. So, and also, first of all, I thought it's also a good platform to acknowledge the Indo-Swiss cooperation in science and technology is really on a very firm ground, right from 2003, when we had an agreement, and the recent renewal 2 months back. What it means is there is an institutional framework for enhancing this cooperation between these two great democracies, which can also be a model for many bilaterals. Now, coming to your question, science advice and diplomatic perspective, they are really complementary in many ways, because science advice will look at evidence-based policy, but the actualization of that cannot be done till we have the diplomatic perspective. So these two have to tie together for anything to make long-term innovative framework. If it is one or the other, it will not sustain itself. Now, I'll give you, in the context you asked, there are many critical and emerging technologies where the science advice will have certain way to look at. It will be probably much faster than the diplomatic convergence usually. So we have to make sure that we do it right. And we also need to see what are the ethical and inclusive consideration for any technology. Two examples. One, of course, is on everyone's agenda, is the artificial intelligence, which has immense potential, which it is changing in our daily life. But look at the artificial general intelligence, which is in the making. And unless the science advice looks at even the ethical issues and makes out the right framework, it will not be sustainable for humanity. Second one is the quantum technology. Again, it is changing our lives, because whatever the security we have in our transactions in the last 100 years, with all the framework put in, all that is now under disruption. So quantum computing will make it disruptive. Now, it depends on us how we prepare ourselves, but at the same time, don't be afraid to engulf these cutting-edge technologies. So that's a path we have to take, where we will need to make sandboxes, technology sandboxes for these emerging technologies, so that it can be safely deployed before the risks become too high. And risks should not tell us not to do a technology. I think that's a bottom line, because in the fear, you can also be killed and don't do the technology development. So you should not really have a way that you make so many regulations that all the innovation is killed. So that's the way.
Just, it looks like, Alex, I know I could see you have a thought on that. Can I just go back to something you said at the beginning just then, though? You said that it's a good, that India and Switzerland could be a good model. Given we're talking about diplomacy here, I mean, do you have to have like-minded governments? Do they have to be democracies for these kinds of partnerships to work?
It works best in that scenario, because what do you need actually for any collaboration, which is probably known to everyone, is only 5-letter word, and that is trust. If you don't have trust, no amount of diplomacy can work. So trust is the first principle of any collaboration, and this is what I said between India and Switzerland. It's extremely high. We now need to take this trust on a higher scale and convert into action. And that's where the science diplomacy, science advice rather, will lead to science diplomacy and action. So the trust between two partners is a must, because you can't be talking to each other with gun in your back pocket, right? I mean, that can only happen in movies, not in the country.
Okay.
So trust is a must.
Alexandre, you looked like you were about to leap into saying something when you talked about killing technologies.
I was going to make this other link between science advice and science diplomacy, and especially anticipatory science diplomacy, in the sense of when the chief science advisor, chief scientist does advise his or her government, it should be evidence-based, and all policies of government ought to be evidence-based. But what is the evidence on science that is in the process of emerging, which is not there yet, which we do not concretely understand? That's where we need to develop the capability and nurture the capability to develop something we call in German ein Ahnungsvermögen, so a capability to form an idea of what it could be and could be happening. And such elements, such discussions are usually, or in the case of GESDA, conducted on an international and on a global level, and science advice can then tap in and participate in this discussion in order to develop their Ahnungsvermögen as to be able then to better advise their government. So,
I mean, do you have an example of where that's worked, or you have done this? But I mean, let's talk about AI, for instance. Has that approach yielded results?
I'll use the other example Professor Sood just brought. That is the Open Quantum Initiative of GESDA. Based on the radar, we realized that quantum computing is bound to change the world. It will be so powerful that we are struggling to understand what it will mean. And we struggle to understand what we are going to use it for. So we need to understand what it is, and we need to start developing use cases. And that's the work we've done here, which has led to this creation of a global, of this Open Quantum Institute, which is hosted at CERN. And in that process, when we incubated this idea, participated in that work, all the scientists who had given us the radar and the initial insight and the starting point of the conversation and the thinking process, but also the private sector, the universities, the states, international organizations, civil society, and so together we developed this idea. And India indeed was part of this group of 20+ countries who created that. So that's a concrete example. And we still don't know what it exactly will be. But the countries that have participated have now a privileged insight, a good idea of it. It is an insight and a knowledge we share globally, and we are open. And that then will help them not to be overwhelmed when it happens, but understand what it is and apply the right policy measures to it in order to benefit fully of it.
Is there anything specific you've learned from India as well as part of a dialogue and partnerships as well?
I think the very basis of it all is the excellence of the science. So that is the starting point. And that is something which GESDA doesn't, that's what science ministries do in their international corporations. So that the science is excellent, that it is solid, that it is science you can trust in, and based on that you can then have that cooperation. And indeed, India is a country.
So I can amplify what you asked. Actually, in the Indian context, we realized just before when the COVID was setting in, that quantum technologies will be necessary for technology sovereignty of a country. This was realized. So a Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council, which is chaired by me, Principal Scientific Advisor, we brainstormed with all stakeholders, academia, industry, startups, and the society. What is really there on the horizon? This is what anticipatory framework works. And we realized that we need to invest in this on all fronts. So we, with the consultative process, after that, we made a framework with resources put in place and putting all the verticals of quantum computing, quantum communication, and quantum sensors on the same footing, not only the computing alone, because you should realize that quantum sensing will be a huge, huge business in coming years. Because all your big MRI machines, maybe thing of past, you might have to put them in exhibition only. Because when you get this highly sensitive quantum computers, quantum sensors, you may not need 3 Tesla coil. You might work with a much smaller coil. That will be the disruption. So who will benefit? Think about it. It is the society. Because eventually the high-end technology will translate to that. And the same framework we applied to AI. So in AI mission, again, which is a outcome of this PM strike, we put 7 verticals because I don't know whether
This is part of the AI Safety Institute?
No, Safety Institute is one part, but we said that's not enough. There is actually a huge divide developing already in the world, like a digital divide. Already you can see AI rich and AI poor. Already it is happening. All the LLMs, whatever you call, are done by the developed countries on a data which is really not reflective of the developing countries. Huge asymmetry, huge power asymmetry, and it will be used actually by the developing world. This is not sustainable. So why the example I am giving is in AI, you need compute power. Compute power will not come just by asking. You need to invest and you need to plan. So our AI mission democratized this compute power by buying lot of resources from federal funding and giving it to our researchers and startups and industry to really do the AI development and so on. Data everyone says is a new oil, but federated data needs a framework. You need a digital public infrastructure analog of AI. Because when you have the data sharing, you should know what are the legal things, what are the technology you need. So we call techno-legal framework. But you also should know that if it is my data, my medical history going in a model, why should I be denied the monetization of that? Right? So that is a big ethical question which this techno-legal framework can handle, and it will handle. And India has a suggestion and a way it will come out in AI Summit also with the framework. What should we be doing on that? And the participation of Switzerland, which is absolutely essential, because you have to realize this AI Summit is the 5th one or 4th one, I forgot, and it's the first one in the global south.
It's very important.
It's a nice thing that the global south need not be only the user of a technology.
And what would make that summit, what do you hope to get from that summit, from the global south?
So what we are looking at is that it should have a outcome which will be just beyond one LLM model or the next one. It should not be just that prescriptive, but it should make a framework. Can we have a global data sharing framework? Can we have it? Because all the data which is in public domain on internet actually has been used. So there is no reason that it will do anything new. Now, the personal data is the one which will make all this artificial general intelligence or the super intelligence make it work. That framework is not there right now across the countries.
So I know Switzerland is possibly, maybe even you could confirm for us whether or not Switzerland might host 2027, the Global AI Summit.
We would love to. We would love to. And the hosting country has then a decisive influence on who the next host is. And I hope that Professor Sood and our Indian friends will help us that we can have this next summit. Because we see that's how the international community operates frequently. There is something to be discussed. It is not quite clear how and what should be done. So let's do a conference. Good. Like in government, let's do a committee. But that's actually a good thing, because one conference leads to another one, and the collective knowledge becomes ever more nuanced and sophisticated. And one conference passes the baton to the next one, and the next conference takes the elements still further and dwells deeper into it. And that, I think, a good approach. And can I confirm what Professor Sood said, that the countries of what we now call the Global South, the developing countries, they do not want only to be users of something that will come. They want, and especially in the context of anticipation, where you look far, far into the future, such as the approach with GESDA. This is one key to the success of GESDA, is that the developing countries tell GESDA, we want to be there from scratch. And because you are deep into the future with anticipation and nothing solid is there yet, we can co-create, and we want to be immediately and deeply involved in that work.
So is that how, I mean, we've spoken a bit about how like-minded countries, democracies are best suited for bilateral agreements on this and for working together on this. Is that how, because a lot of developing countries, Global South, their political systems look very different to, say, Switzerland's. Is this the way that they can be involved, or are there other ways?
Yeah, actually what happens is we need to really see how do we learn from each other. It cannot be only transactional. The relationship, if it is only transactional, it will be only short-lived in real life or otherwise. It has to see beyond a transactional relationship on a long-term basis. And this is where the clarity has to come, what each one can contribute. And this bilateral can really be also a model for other countries to chip in. Just I thought when Mr. Fasel was saying this, AI when we do in India, actually India is a cosmos where you want to test the diversity of languages. We have 27 official languages, or maybe 28, he can correct me. We have maybe double the number of dialects. We have culture which is quite diverse, food habits diverse, and even whatever the way even we think can have diversity, which is probably, you can see the model almost Europe in India, right? What we see. Now, if we can see that whatever we develop in, whether it is in AI, whether it is in One Health framework, or whether it is in all other like critical clean energy transition, it has to look at the diversity of all these points. So what I would like to say that if we can do a multilingual framework, and we cannot see anyone as a less deprived than the other, equally equitable participation, that will be sustainable. So when we talk of India-Swiss, actually it's not only the bilateral, but we can have this model with other countries which can be partner in one way or the other. And Swiss has a huge experience and capacity and whatever you call in neutral diplomacy. I mean, the whole world acknowledges that the way you have positioned yourself so well over the last 100 years, or maybe 75 years at least, that it is a, right? I mean,
yes.
Almost that. So that is a very powerful message. What can we do?
And the way to do it, when you bring together all the stakeholders, and that is true nationally, as we just heard, when you bring all the stakeholders, that is also the methodology of GESDA. Because when we try to understand as policymakers and diplomats what the breakthrough science is, what the technology that will be emerging out of it could be, then you bring together different worlds. And frequently the discourse is scientists and diplomats or policymakers don't speak the same language. So we need to understand one another better, and we need to create a common language. I don't share that. My point is, it is not by having a para-discourse on the language that we advance. It is by sitting together and actually do something with the information and the anticipation and the idea we have, and then do something, imagine together a use case, simulate it, try to realize, concept test it, and so on. And through this joint action, you grow this space of shared experience, which then you can grow. And then can be beneficial to the international community as for states themselves.
Just a small add-on to that. Actually, I am one of the examples where I come from the science. I mean, I'm a physicist by training.
Yes.
And I have almost 500 publications. But
impressive.
In the last 3.5 years, I have this responsibility. Now I see how there is a synergy actually in this. So the scientific method of what you think as a hypothesis, what do you make a plan, and how do you implement, and how do you change the plan depending on whether your hypothesis was wrong or right, you can change it. Actually, the same parallel is there in science policy. Because science policy and science advice cannot be ad hoc. It's not sustainable.
I have hogged my panelists for too long, and we only have time for a couple of questions. But does someone in the audience, would they like to ask a question? I see a hand up over there. If you could introduce yourself. I think some people are running around with microphones over here. Introduce yourself, please, and keep your question, no statements, please, question brief. Just over here on the right. Thank you.
Joshua Gordon, Columbia University. How do you reconcile the desire for to keep interest and/or ownership of data with the desire to open that data up to allow free scientific inquiry?
Would you like to take that?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. See, the point is we have to see, actually our digital public infrastructure, if you look at it in more detail, actually provides a very nice example of how to use data in a manner that it is not compromised, but it also does not choke the system due to regulations. So, because we have the banks in our unified payment system, we have the people, and this has to, because when we say payment, everything has to be integrated with the data, because bank should know your data to do this transaction. And that is done through this secured confidential technology link, technology box we call, and that makes it feasible. So if you have data, you don't have to be afraid that it will be compromised. Because what is happening is that if you sit on the data, actually it is of no use. Right? You have medical data for last 100 years. Can you really use it without compromise the privacy? That's the challenge. And that is what I am saying now with our computational framework developed to a very good extent. There are technology solutions for it. So you can do that. And in my view, this is the way forward for taking all these digital technologies, be it AI, be it robotics, be it digital medicine, all that will need the data access in a way that it's not compromised. I hope I could answer that.
Thank you very much. We probably have time for just one more. If I see one, also just if you could pass the mic, that would be great. Thank you. And just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah. Yvette Madrid, I'm a global health advisor. I have a question about the role of diplomacy in addressing guardrails. and specifically situations that are something akin to the prisoner's dilemma, where there's an overall benefit for societies to collaborate, but there are also incentives for individual actors, countries or other, to not collaborate. And how can diplomacy deal with these issues?
Good question. Alexandre?
The answer of anticipatory science diplomacy, or what GESDA does, and my government through GESDA tries to do, is to start the process early enough, in a moment where you are really looking far into the future, where there is still a certain degree of uncertainty what exactly that science, what exactly that technology will be, and where human imagination contributes to forming what it will be. And there you act in a moment where the science and technology at stake is not in a commercially competitive state yet, because it's too early, it's not sufficiently solid. And that is the moment where you can, while imagining what it is, imagining use cases, organizing how they could be used, where you come across all the governance questions that you will have to answer once the technology is there and in full flight. And so you overtake that process, or you precede this international process. In the case of where the technology is already there and you need to regulate it, there you have then the tension between the ones who want a full international intergovernmental regulations, the ones who do want nothing at all, and then the big majority which is somewhere in the middle, such as us, Switzerland, and who then plead that it should be a multi-stakeholder governance, that the ones who co-created should be involved also in the governance. And there are several examples where it is successful, others where the tensions remain.
So I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Time flies when you have such interesting topics to discuss. So I think, for me, it's anticipatory diplomacy. It's not so much about kind of anticipating exactly what's going to happen, but it's like about preparing for it, right? And I think science sees what's coming, can see what's coming, and diplomacy can help us decide what to do about it. Let's hope for the best. We've got global AI summits. Hopefully India, well, we know India, Switzerland coming up. Secretary Fasel, Professor Sood, thank you so much, for participating today and being part of this. I found it really insightful.
It's an honor.
Thank you. And if you could take a moment to fill out the feedback summary, what do you call it? Sorry, now I've spoken so much, I'm losing track of what I can say. But we have a QR code on the screen for the feedback survey. And if you are hungry for more of these topics, we've got a couple coming up at 11:45. One is on language and another on AI. So hope to see you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci.